And we're live. So hello and welcome to the Library Lived In. I'm Lisa and this is Anise.
Hi.
And we are going to discuss today The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washinton Irving. So let's start with ratings. How did you feel about this one?
I would give it 3 stars. I liked it. And it was a pretty quick read since it's such a short story. I hadn't read it before, but I had seen the Disney Legend of, or Adventures of Ichabod Crane, whatever that one is called. So I was already a little familiar with the story. But I enjoyed it.
I think that movie, that Disney movie, was my introduction to the story as a kid too. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 4. I really love this one, and I have read it before, so I guess I have to say yes, I'd read it again. And I liked it enough now that I think I'd pick it up again. But if I do, I think I'd want to read the entire volume and not. Like both times I've read it, I've just read it as the short story by itself. I think I'd want to read like the whole and get the full experience. So, all right. Should we go on to a summary? So the summary that I went through several ones and tried to find one that I liked. And the one I got today comes from gradesaver.com. I'll just throw that out there. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was published as a part of Washinton Irving's The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, which came out in 1820. It's probably the most famous story of the collection and is considered one of Irving's most important stories. The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon was extremely well received in America and was the first work by an American author to be reviewed well in Europe. I'm going to skip down. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is thought to have a source in a German folktale, and it tells the story of Ichabod Crane, a greedy and naive schoolmaster from Connecticut, who tries to win the hand of the flirtatious and very wealthy Katrina Van Tassel. Brom Bones, a neighborhood hero, is also in love with Katrina and has a tendency to play pranks on others, which will come to haunt Ichabod soon enough. Ichabod is especially fascinated by ghost stories and witches, and Sleepy Hollow is known for its supernatural activity, especially its infamous ghost, the Headless Horseman. One night after a party at the Van Tassels, at which Katrina probably rejects Ichabod, Ichabod finds himself joined by a dark figure on a large horse on his ride home. He cannot shake his unwanted companion, and Crane eventually realizes that the horseman has no head. Ichabod does his best to escape, but just when he expects the Headless Horseman to disappear, the ghost instead throws the head at him, knocking him off his horse. The next day, nothing is found of Ichabod but his hat, and next to it lies a smashed pumpkin. Ichabod is never seen in Sleepy Hollow again, and Brom Bones soon after marries Katrina. The townspeople blame Ichabod's disappearance on the Headless Horseman, but Brom seems to know something more. The tale thus brings a love story and a ghost story together, but most of all, it's a comic tale. The plot appeals to most common sentiments, but the story makes fun of communities that are so sleepy they need ghosts and ghost stories to keep people occupied. It also makes fun of a schoolmaster who's supposed to be one of the smartest people in town, yet believes in ghosts and is easily spooked and tricked by a practical joke. The man of letters plays second fiddle to the athletic, strong Brom Bones. So it's a little bit long, but kind of covers all of it. So what did you think, I guess, about the story?
I can't say I liked any of the characters very much. But overall, I liked the storyline. I liked the descriptions of the town and the description of the Van Tassel's farm and their house and all the things they owned. Made it easy to see why Ichabod would be daydreaming about being the master of that place. And I like at the end where it basically gives you all the information where you're pretty sure that it was a practical joke, but you're not entirely sure. Like, it's still possible that it could have been an actual headless horseman that chased after him.
Yes, and you can take the moral as you'd like, right?
Yeah.
You have a choice. I loved the descriptiveness. You talk about the descriptiveness of, like, the town. But I think Washinton Irving also does a great job of describing the people. I feel like you get a really good visual. What do people look like? You get an idea of their personalities really well. I feel like he's just a great storyteller. And you can see he's sitting down with, just sitting down with a good storyteller and listening to it. It's just a good telling. So I guess, should we talk about a couple different people?
Yes.
Ichabod Crane. So he's from Connecticut, and he's a school teacher, and he's come to Sleepy Hollow in New York to teach. And he's kind of written down the description of his physical appearance because it's pretty funny, but he's gangly and awkward and not all that attractive, I think. And anyway, so he stays with the different students' families. That's being the custom of the time. And so he rotates through and he teaches at the school there. We already said, like, he's super into ghost stories and supernatural things. Like, he thinks it's all very real, but he's terrified of it all. Like, which kind of makes things tricky, I think. And his students, I thought it was interesting. It talks about how he, I don't know, the whole old adage, the spare the rod, spoil the child, like that he believed in that and that he would use like physical punishment, but he would never like go past what people could handle.
Right.
So he makes a point of like trying to make sure that he gives the kids what they could, or the students, pupils, what they could handle. Because I can't say kids because Katrina's one of his students and she's marriageable age, so we can say kids. Do you have any thoughts about Ichabod?
I think he's really funny as a character, just because, like you said, of his physical description. Like, you get a very clear picture that he is really odd looking, and it was funny to me how I think it said something when he was going to punish one of the kids. He tried not to punish the ones whose mothers were good cooks, because he would always go around to stay at his students' houses. I believe that's what he did. He'd stay at each student's house a week at a time, and I wasn't sure if that was that a normal thing back then, or because I don't think I have heard of that before.
I think it was. That came up when I read Little House on the Prairie. That was a thing that was in Little House on the Prairie too.
We have to take a little pause.
Go ahead. We'll pause here.
No, you don't want to do that. Let's try to clean this up. Oh, that wasn't a good idea. You want to play with your sisters? Go outside. Or do you want to have a nap? Here, let's wipe you off. Do you want a nap? Or do you want to go outside? Put your shoes on. Which one do you want? Nap? Okay, you can go outside. Go ahead. She was bringing me these Otter Pops, and they're not frozen, and she tore one open and spilled it.
Oh no!
Okay, well, we're fine now.
Okay. Teacher staying with the students.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was a thing in like earlier communities, especially like poorer towns or more rural towns, to stay with the families of the pupils. I think it was a thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, it was like looking out for his own interest.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to punish this one too harshly because I don't want it to come back and hurt me later.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And I guess if you were staying with all the students' families, you would take that into consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Might be a little harder to punish your students if you know you have to go meet the parents every day, I guess. Maybe. I also thought it was interesting, like, for somebody who's, you know, the teacher's supposed to be wise, educated, he spends an awful lot of time thinking of shallow things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, about looks, about wealth, about, I don't know, worldly, tangible things instead of
Right.
deep, thoughtful things.
I think that's probably one of the reasons why at the end you don't really feel bad for him, or at least I didn't.
No, I really don't. You really don't. Okay, so his rival is Brom, or Abraham von Brunt.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like the physical opposite. You know, he's like the big, strong, what's the right word? Not just strong, but like athletic, talented. Talks about he's good on horseback, and but he's a little bit mischievous, and he likes to kind of tease and pull pranks on people. But it also talks about like he's generally kind of a good guy. Like he'll look out after people. You kind of get the idea that maybe, or I did, that the mischievousness is more like because he's young. Like maybe if he had time to grow up, he would kind of go out of that a little bit because he's generally a kind-hearted person. I don't know. That's kind of how I felt about him. But he's definitely not really thrilled with Ichabod, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel any way about, or do you have anything about Brom you wanted to?
No, I got the same impression. And it was interesting, I thought, the contrast between the two of them. Because I was a little confused at first when it was saying like that it seemed like Katrina's attention was more favorable towards Ichabod, because that doesn't seem to make sense at all. Like if you have the choice between these two people, it wouldn't be obvious to choose Ichabod. And at the end, that's not what happens. And so I just thought the contrast between them was interesting.
It is. And you know what? I think it's in the postscript, but the suggestion is made that really maybe Katrina was never interested in Ichabod, but it was just kind of a game to make Brom jealous. Because that's what she was really interested in anyway. And that's a little more believable to me.
Yeah.
Anyways. And you would feel bad for Ichabod for getting drug along with that, except you really don't, because it's his, you know, because of his nature.
Right.
So I guess that brings us to Katrina's, like the other big main character. And she's the only child of a well-to-do farmer. Here she's 17 or 18 years old. Beautiful, talented. I think she takes singing lessons from Ichabod as well as being in class. Flirtatious. I think the book calls her coquettish, you know. So I don't know. I don't think you get a whole lot about her so much. She's treated more like the object of the rivalry, the object of everybody's affections.
Right.
everybody in town is in love with her, but Brom kind of pushes most of them away, except Ichabod. Ichabod's just too much fantasizing about not even her, but like the stuff that will come with her, the farm, the wealth, the money,
right,
the ability to quit teaching, you know, to let it go. I don't know, his eyes are bigger than his head. What do you think of Katrina?
I don't know. I didn't really get much of a sense of her as a character beyond her being the object of the rivalry. So.
Yeah. I think it does just kind of make her out as sort of the object. I'm not really sure how I feel about that.
No, me neither. Do you think it was just because of the time period that this book was written, or because it was important to the story?
I think it was convenient to the story. I think the time period for sure. One of the things I was reading, reviews or something I was reading, makes the point that even though the time period, and even though she's kind of made the object and not really her own agency and character, is given the final choice. Like she's the one that makes the decision between Brom and Ichabod. She's the one that makes that, and so she really has the power in the end.
Right.
And so I don't know. So maybe it does have a piece to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think though it still leaves you wondering a little bit because just a minute. I think it does leave you kind of wondering because it doesn't say exactly what happens at the party, whether or not Katrina rejects Ichabod or not, but he's upset when he's leaving. But you're not entirely sure what happened.
Right.
And then he's just gone. He disappears. So.
Yeah. Leaves it open.
Yeah.
There's a couple other, I don't know if important characters, like there's a few other characters, but Diedrich Knickerbocker is the narrator, right? So the story is in the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, and in the start, Geoffrey Crayon says he gets the story from Diedrich Knickerbocker, and it's kind of like this second, third-hand story, right? And well, the person I got it from, he's not even sure if he believes it's true. So there's this whole sort of distancing that makes it, I think, really sort of myth-like. So I think, even though you only hear his name, I think, once in the whole story, it's kind of an important character. It's important the way that it was set up for you to kind of, at the very end, have that, like, do I believe it? Do I not believe it? What really happened? And so, anyway, I just thought I'd throw him in there.
Yeah.
And then the Headless Horseman himself. Headless Horseman himself. The first time I read it, I did not pick up on this, but this time I did. It talks about him possibly having been a Hessian. Did you know about that?
I remember the term, but I didn't look up what it was.
Yeah, well, obviously I didn't before either. And I did this time. So the Hessians were Germans, soldiers from northern Germany.
We're making fake paws. No, listen, so you can't do that.
German princes, they were rented from German princes by the British to fight on the British side in the Revolutionary War against the Americans. And that's who the Hessians were. They were from the area of Hesse in Germany. And so they were rented soldiers is what they were. And so what I found was that they first came to the States in, well, it wasn't even the States then. They first came to America in August of 1776 in the New York area. And so kind of the importance, I guess, that comes into is that in Sleepy Hollow, and you have the older residents and the ones that, you know, I mean, they're in the region of New York, and this is post-revolutionary time. It would have been a very important character. This, I found this little bit also where I found the summary of the book that says the ghost of Hessian was doubly scary, for not only was it a ghost, but it was a ghost of someone who had been hired to kill rebellious Americans. And this particular Hessian was likely to be particularly angry for having died while in service. So that would have been like extra, extra scary to the residents of this sleepy little town, making it like that much more of a terrifying ghost story. It's not just a headless horseman that's out to get you, but he has like revenge and anger, and they have real life terror associated with these people as well. So I thought that was an interesting little addition that I never picked up on before.
That really is.
So the headless horseman, I thought we had to put him in there. Are there any of the other characters that stood out to you, or you felt like those are the big ones?
Yeah, no, I would agree with those ones.
Okay. And so we're set in New York, in post-Revolutionary War, out in the country. So this is all going on, and it's kind of like a plain little town, but here something finally happens, you know, like they tell the stories, but then something finally happens. They all think it's real, except for Brom. And it does leave it at the end kind of open. So what do you think? What do you think really happens?
I think probably Brom got brave enough to scare Ichabod away when he probably at the party saw whatever happened between them and knew that he had a bigger chance than he thought he did. That's what I think.
Yeah, I kind of get the feeling like maybe Ichabod took hope from how well everything went at the party and thought, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and propose, you know, and got rejected. And then yes, Brom had laid this little trap for him, you know. And I wonder, like, it makes it sound like it was all him, you know, like nobody else knew what had happened.
Right.
It was just his own little thing. Any other, I guess, some stuff about the author and some other things, but anything else about the story that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think I preferred the book to the movie.
Really?
Disney adaptation, yes. Even though it has Bing Crosby as the narrator and he sings in it, it seemed like there was way more focus on chasing after Katrina, which was not as enjoyable for me as the rest of the story.
So I watched the movie like maybe 2 years ago for the first time since I was a kid. It had been like years and years and years. And I don't know if it was on Netflix or something, but it popped up and I told my kids like, oh, you have to watch it with me. And they rolled their eyes and we watched it anyway. And it was funny because I completely forgot about Bing Crosby. And I was like, hey, I know who this is. I know that voice. And it was really fun. Like, it's a fun part of my childhood. And I thought, when I went back and read it again, I thought there's some things that they nailed dead on.
Mhm.
Like the descriptions, I feel like they translate the descriptions of Ichabod, like his physical characteristics,
Mhm.
really well into the art of the character.
Yeah.
But there's definitely things you miss. Like, you can't fit it all in there, and they're definitely adapting it for, you know, kids movie.
Mhm.
So there's things that you miss that you get out of the story, and so I can't skip his story altogether. So, but I don't know if I'll give it up altogether. I have to watch it every, you know, couple of years or something.
Uh-huh.
So, I did run across some things about kind of the importance of imagination
Mhm.
in the book, and the idea of imagination that I thought were interesting. Like the whole town is wrapped up in all these stories and everything, and Ichabod is as well, which is kind of counter to what you expect from his character, because he's this educated person. You expect him to be,
Mhm.
you know, if it's not in a book and it's not proven, then it must not be true, even though given the time, you'd expect him to be a little less likely to believe whatever stories he hears.
Mhm.
But that,
I think one thing I noticed was that the one time it mentions him reading a book, he's reading Cotton Mather's book about the Salem witch trials. And so I think that gives a really big insight into what kind of person he is.
yes, I think it says somewhere like he deemed himself an expert on things like that too, witch trials and that sort of thing. Yeah, I think that says a lot. Just because he got, you know, just because he became a teacher doesn't maybe say as much about his character, and maybe we assume that, you know, like, well, you're a teacher, you must be a certain way. But his imagination, like, he becomes so obsessed with his vision of how things are going to work out with him and Katrina, that he has no idea of the reality. And he's so caught up in these, believing the reality of these things that aren't true, that that's what drives him off. Like, so it's his own imagination that makes all the things that he wants not come true.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought that was interesting as well.
You think that's the moral of the story?
I just think it's one of the takeaways. I think there's lots of good takeaways, lots of good morals. So I don't know. Do you have a moral you think?
I'm not sure. I think like you're never really rooting for Ichabod. And even though I think Brom is a much more likable character, I didn't find myself necessarily rooting for him either. But I think it says a lot that he's the one who ended up with Katrina rather than Ichabod. And so maybe that just says something about common sense should prevail.
There is something to that. There is something to that. Yes. I think there's a few lessons you can take away. I think that's a good one. I found after this time that I did like Brom better than I have in the past. I could see some good there, and I really felt maybe he just needs to mature a little bit. But he wasn't, I just didn't feel like he was quite as irritating as I did before. When I read him before. Before, I think I just thought of him as an obnoxious jock. But now I was like, no, he has some good sides. He just hasn't learned it all yet.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'll maybe visit him. Somebody can write a follow-up. Okay, so I'm just going to talk just a bit about Washinton Irving. Just mention a little bit about him for for fun, for background, for fun. So he was born in New York City in 1783. He was the youngest of 11 children so was a Scottish and English immigrants. And he was named after George Washington and was even attended the presidential inauguration of George Washington in person. So it was pretty interesting. He did a lot of like back and forth in his career, not really wanting to go. He didn't want to go to school, so he became a law apprentice instead. And he wrote a little, and he worked as editor for a little while. He served in the military during the War of 1812 for a little while, but he didn't really commit to anything. And went back and forth. He was engaged at one point. I think he had put out 2 books, his first 2 books, and they'd done relatively well. And then his fiance died, and he kind of like found himself lost, didn't know what to do with himself. So he went to England because he had siblings there that were trying to run a business, as a shipping business, maybe. I think it's shipping. And so like, oh, I'll go work with them for a while, figure out my life. And the business, I think, failed. And so he finally decided, he was 35. He finally decided, well, you know what? I should have an income. I should probably be able to support myself now. And he finally decided, I'm going to go with writing. I think for a little while there, he thought maybe I should continue with law. And I think he took the bar. I think he just passed the bar exam, but he was not very committed to it. So it wasn't until after this sort of like, yes, I'm going to commit to writing, that he wrote this book of short stories and essays. And after that, I thought it was interesting. So he wrote, like, for the rest of his life, he did some biography. He did like a 5-volume biography of George Washington, short stories, all kind of essays. He did a history of New York. But he also did some kind of government positions. So he was the Secretary of the United States Legation to London in 1829 until 1832. And the U.S. Minister to Spain from 1842 to 1846. So is that interesting? Like, I don't know how he ended up like doing that, but and then he spent his last years on his estate. It said, I guess his New York estate was named Sunnyside, and writers and artists and politicians would all gather and hang out at his estate together. And so he would stay there and he would write in this great little area until he passed away in 1859. And I guess he pushed quite a bit for greater protection of copyright for writers. And I love when writers create new words and they end up working into the language over time. So Knickerbocker is from him, and Gotham, like New York City and Gotham and Batman and anyways, that comes from him. Gotham comes from him. So who knew? But that's what I have about a very interesting life, a little crazy. And I think it's interesting that he didn't really decide what he was going to do with himself until he was in his mid-30s.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is common for the time. You know?
No. And that's interesting that he isn't remembered really for any of those things. It's just this story.
Yes, this one and the Rip Van Winkle story, I think, are the two.
Yeah.
The two big ones. Yeah, not the 5 volumes on George Washington, not any of the political things, these 2 stories kind of are the ones. So, but apparently he wrote quite a bit. He should have a long list of works. So, very interesting man. And from what I gather, I don't think he ever married. Maybe he was heartbroken over that first engagement not quite working out. So, I guess, do you have anything about him?
Nope. I knew about his history of New York because I considered picking that for next month. But no, I didn't know anything else about him. So that was really cool.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting guy. I kind of want to go back and read some of those.
Yeah.
No. So some just random interesting things. Obviously, there have been a lot of movies. There's movies, TV. Before that, radio adaptations. Now they're stage plays. There's a musical now, the Sleepy Hollow, the musical, that have all been adapted from this short story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a long list of things that I found, like so long that I was not going to write it down and read it all. But there are a lot of things, and I thought it was really interesting that, it's just over 100 pages, but it's inspired a lot of other creative work. A lot of paintings I found based on it. It's just kind of fun. And then the town, in the book, he talks about Tarrytown region is where this happened. Well, North Tarrytown, New York, which is, I think, is where he's buried. That was the name of the town, that area, since the late 1800s. In 1997, they changed their name to Sleepy Hollow.
Oh.
So now you can go to Sleepy Hollow, New York. And like I said, I think that's where he's buried. And they have like a big statue of the Headless Horseman chasing Ichabod Crane in town, and some fun things. So good literary field trip, I think, if you need to do one of those one day.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Right? I think I want to go there. And then the U.S. Postal Service issued a Legend of Sleepy Hollow stamp in October of 1974, which is really cool. And I'm going to put it on our Pinterest board. It's a really cool looking graphic design. So just some fun little random.
Yeah,
tidbits.
why do you think it is that this story has kind of remained in the public consciousness so well when so many others have been forgotten?
Right. I think part of it is the storytelling is really good. I think part of it is a lot of the basic elements are very relatable. Whether whether you identify with a character yourself, or whether it's, yeah, I know somebody like that. You know, and there's the basic, I feel like the morals are basic things that you can take away. So even if it was written in the 1800s, it still applies. You know, the whole ego, the whole, you're focusing on wealth and riches and not on people. You're letting your imagination run away with you. All these sort of things still apply. And I think we just relate to that innately as human beings. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree. And I think something else is that I think we tend to like familiar, like recurring things, like traditions almost. So I think it's probably just kind of a thing that's been passed down through the generations. Because the whole reason why we watched it recently was because my mom remembered watching it when she was a kid. And so I think that just keeps happening, and people remember it and it stays with them. And so they introduce it to their kids, and it just keeps going.
Probably very true. And me dragging my kids and saying, "You're going to come watch this." Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just find it interesting too that it has been used as a basis for other creative works. And I think when you have a piece of literature, a piece of art, whatever that inspires other creative works, then there's something like innately relatable about it. When we read the Arthurian legends, how much you found that has spun off of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing. I mean, when it inspires that many more people to write and to paint and to, I think it's because there's something they connect to.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Well, that is all that I have for the Legend of Sleepy Hollow in Washinton Irving. So if you don't have anything on this to add, then I'll go ahead and let you introduce our next story, our next book.
Right. I have chosen The Island at the Center of the World, the epic story of Dutch Manhattan and the forgotten colony that shaped America. Because I thought the setting for this story was really cool in early America, where there was still that really huge Dutch influence, because in this story, everybody is a Van somebody. And so I thought it'd be interesting to learn more about that. And this book had really good reviews. And it's available at both of our libraries, so I think it'll be a great read.
All right.
Also, is this going to be our first nonfiction book?
I think it is. Wow, this is a hallmark moment.
So yeah, this is really exciting. Also, we should probably mention that this month is our year anniversary of streaming the Library Lifted, which is really exciting.
It is.
So yeah, so this next one is going to be our 12th book.
Super excited.
Mm-hmm.
Super excited. It's gone really fast.
It has.
Here's to many more good books.
Yes.
More good books. I can't believe it took us a whole year to pick a nonfiction book.
No.
There are so many good books in the world, it's hard to pick and choose. All right, so The Island at the Center of the World.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we will see you next month. Happy reading. All right, take care.
Bye.